the third and final side of the exposure triangle, ISO. You can say ISO, you can say ISO, I don't care. Some people do, ignore them. It doesn't really stand for anything in photography terms. It comes from the organisation that created it, and it's the International Standards Organisation. So it's not anything specific that you need to know about photography. Now, ISO is a number. It's a number that relates to how sensitive the sensor or the film you're using is to light, as in how quickly it absorbs the light in order to create your exposure. The lower the number, the slower it absorbs light. As the number doubles, the amount of light exposure doubles. So for example, ISO 100 is usually treated as the base ISO in most cameras and in most systems, as in the standard ISO. ISO 200 absorbs light twice as quickly as ISO 100. Now you can set ISO 300 in some cameras, but it doesn't absorb light twice as quick as ISO 200. ISO 400 absorbs the light twice as fast as ISO 200. ISO 800 absorbs it twice as fast as ISO 400. ISO 1600 absorbs it twice as fast as ISO 800, and so on. So you double the number to double the speed of the exposure and the sensitivity to light. Now, it's a simple way of balancing your exposure. It doesn't affect movement, as in blur, in the same way that shutter speed do, and it doesn't affect depth of field in the same way that aperture does. Actually, it doesn't affect depth of field at all. What it does is it affects something called noise in an image, or grain. You may hear the phrase from film days. Now, in film, the reason we call it grain is it's particularly obvious in black and white images. You may see like grains of colour, looks like almost like grains of rice within the film. The higher the ISO number, the more likely that is to happen. The lower the ISO number, the cleaner the image will be. So as a general rule of thumb, you want to shoot as low as you possibly can while getting the settings that you're happy with on shutter speed and aperture. In digital cameras, as you increase the ISO, you introduce something called digital noise, which is similar in principle to grain, but it presents slightly differently. Digital noise will usually present as speckles of colour throughout the image, where that shouldn't be there. Even if you shoot black and white, you'll get speckles of light where there should be dark. And the more you increase the number, the more prevalent they are. So again, you always want to shoot as low as you possibly can. You set the ISO normally at the beginning of your photo session, and it's the one setting you don't change very often, as long as you set it correctly to begin with. You can set cameras that in very rapidly changing light circumstances that have auto ISO, where the camera will select that for you. We'll talk about that in a future lesson when we talk about camera modes. So, for example, if you were taking a photo of some footballers playing football and you knew you needed to be at 1/1500th of a second in order to freeze the motion to the level you wanted, but that meant that you had to increase your aperture all the way to f1.4, and you were letting in far too, so you ended up with a depth of field that was too shallow, that parts of the action were blurry, so you wanted to increase that to, say, f4.5 to get a bit more depth of field. So you're shooting at 1/1500th of a second, and you're using an aperture of f4.5 or f5, that's getting you the depth of field that you want. You may find at ISO 100, your image is too dark. So you would increase your ISO to the point that you were happy with the level of light in your image. You've been forced to raise your ISO simply because you wanted to get the depth of field right, and you wanted to get the motion blur at the level that you wanted it to be in order to achieve a sharp image. Different photographers will have different tolerances for how high up the ISO level they are willing to get before the noise or the grain becomes more of a problem than the blur or the lack of depth of field would be for them personally in their appreciation of the image. But that's why the ISO, you normally start off with it as low as you possibly can, and you only move it when the other settings are more crucial and you need to raise it in order to achieve the depth of field you want or the shutter speed that you require.